Welcome back to a single malt review. We're again in the Highlands, this time revisiting Ben Nevis for the first time in quite a while.
Yes, indeed. I've been to Ben Nevis. Sadly, not the distillery, the mountain. I went past the distillery, but they were closed. So never mind. My fault going in winter. Mountain's lovely though if you're ever going past.
So now owned by Nikka, is that correct?
Yes.
One of Japan's superb distilleries.
Owned for quite some time by Nikka. In fact, the number 1989 comes to mind, but don't quote me on that because I don't know where my brain's getting that. It just sort of comes up with these dates sometimes. But yeah, 1989 as a loose bet there. Yeah. But yeah, under Japanese ownership, under a lot of different ownerships previously, owned by the, I'm not quite sure what they're into, Whitbread Company, which I do not associate with any other whisky brands before them. But it's sort of been tossed around all its life, really. It's sort of had a bit of a checkered history, has Ben Nevis, but I think it's actually it might not be the world's finest whisky, but it is one of the world's most distinctive whiskies. It has a real individual strength of character,
so
as I think we'll find out.
10-year-old.
Yes, we have the 10-year-old,
46% ABV,
and that's
right.
pretty much all you can get.
Yes.
As far as the individual bottling line goes. There was an older one that sort of propped up more than a few years ago now. It was sort of a gift set. I think it was 20-something years old, and it was hideously expensive and no one bought it, and it was subsequently discontinued. So I think we're pretty much looking at the 10-year-old if you want on-brand Ben Nevis now. But it does show up in just about every independent bottling lineup there is. They're very free with who they sell their casks to, which is good.
Weems Redberry Cream was a 22-year-old Ben Nevis.
One of the more famous ones. That was a delightful Ben Nevis. Yeah. And I think we've done another independent one from Cadenheads, I think, was another Ben Nevis we've done. Goes to show how ubiquitous they are in the independent bottling scene. This is the first Ben Nevis by Ben Nevis that we have ever reviewed. So we'll take stock of this one and see what's going on.
The labelling is verbose but rather old school, and it gives relatively little away. There's a lot of talk of quality written, the distinctive location and such, but aside from the fact that it's matured in oak, we don't know what kind of casks are used here, or for...
Well, coloured or not, I don't actually know. It doesn't say. I can guarantee you, for various reasons, that there is certainly some, if not quite a lot, of Oloroso sherry maturation going on here, because Ben Nevis has one of the most distinctive. It's more in the nose than anything else. Distinctive smells of really any Scotch whisky out there that has a marvellously distinct, fusty, sulphurous character. It's always had this great sort of connection with sulfur, and it's kind of built it into its profile. Maybe 10 years ago or a bit less, there was a really famously over-sulphured batch. Ignore Dave while he sneezes for a second here. No, it's gone away. And most people really hated that, but in some, I think it was Scandinavian and maybe some French markets, they were 100% down with the sulfur. It was really, really, really popular. And slowly but surely, that sort of sulfur element has worked its way into the Ben Nevis style, and it makes it one of the most distinctive nosed whiskies out there. It's one of the very, very few handful of distilleries you can reliably try and get at a blind tasting.
Now, if I could be wrong, but I think you know what it is. The sulphur aroma, that comes from sulphur candles being used to sterilise and maybe char from the sherry casks?
Well, not char, but it's the antibacterial treatment that sherry casks get before being sent over. It stops them going a bit interesting on the inside as they are transported from Spain to Scotland. Not a very long way, really, but still long enough for things to go a bit biological in there if there's not some agent in there keeping them clean. And sulphur is the way to do it, and it's normally done, or historically anyway, by sort of lowering down what's called a sulphur candle, which is more or less that, a sulphur thing with a little wick on it, and lowering it down on a sort of a metal rod and burning it inside the cask, and so the vapours kind of get everywhere and ideally kill everything off. just doing that always imparts a little bit of sulphurous quality on the wood. I've heard horror stories of things like the candle breaking off and falling into the cask, and then sort of making a semblance of effort to get it out, and oh well, off it goes, and that causing, shall we say, problems down the line. But it's not a perfect process, but it does produce really quite an interesting character.
Yeah, I've normally thought of Edradura as being a very sulphury whiskey, but this one is downright.
Yeah, so you get it. Yeah, you get it immediately. It's right there. It's amazing that it so typifies Ben Nevis. And the hilarious part is, to me anyway, a very cynical person, is that Ben Nevis's traditional philosophy, you tell you a great deal about it, while it tells you absolutely nothing about the whiskey on the back of the label. The Ben Nevis philosophy is that it's more the raw ingredients rather than the cask which makes the character of the whiskey. You know, they say it's the water source makes the biggest difference, and it's the grain, and it's how it's distilled, and that's all perfectly true. Those things do make a difference, but to then have the universal the hallmark of Ben Nevis being something that is universally from the cask, I think is a bit of a giggle. But anyway, never mind. Never mind, competing philosophies, I'm sure. So, all that aside, let's have a wee look what the whiskey's actually got for us.
Aside from that sulphury, rubbery tang, there is some sweet fruit. There's some raspberry and strawberry, things evocative of that Weems red berry cream again.
Berries, certainly.
Yeah.
Raspberry running the gambit almost all the way through to strawberry, which only really shows up on very special occasions in Scotch whisky. Old, really, really very old and very expensive, intrinsically, Springbank whisky will show some strawberry compote, strawberry roses chocolate, if you're in a roses market, if you're in the Cadbury territories. That will show up there, and that's representing here, not terribly strongly, it's more raspberry, the one you said first, coming up here, but it's very much sharp, not particularly sweet, tart berries that come through. But everything is sort of under this pall of sulphurous, volcanic, almost sort of a geothermal element of...
It's possible that is obliterating some of the other characters which normally be hiding those berry fruits.
I'm certainly that is destroying some of the nuance in there.
That's letting us maybe explore those berry fruits a little more than we could otherwise.
It really is quite an experience there. So we'll try it at full strength. 46, quite strong.
Ooh.
And
there is no small amount of peat in there.
I think the sulphur kind of steps back for the palate. It's less obvious there, and lets a few other things come through. It is a little bit smoky.
Yeah.
I think the sulphur element exacerbates that somewhat, sort of primes your palate to taste it, but it's still there one way or the other. It's quite a good dry peatiness.
It's a very mineral kind of peat, not the oceanic maritime kind of peat of Islay.
And there's a lot of savoury flavours as well. There's almost there's a little Parma ham going on in there. Dry cured pork.
Sort of a jute, some straw. I'm getting some kind of a bit of a barnyard.
There is duke. There is
as well.
Jute, Hessian, that is. The sort of sacking that's used to secure the bungs, which can actually manifest as a perfectly ordinary flavour in whiskey by that avenue. But I think it's coming from another vector here. I think we might learn a bit more with the water, but I like it, but it's a very, very strange whiskey, doing its own thing, like very few whiskies do. It probably makes it a terrible blender. It's why it's so available as a single malt. That
water has brought out some peat on the nose, which I couldn't detect before under that sulphurous fug.
There is... It's really very, very savoury now.
Dulling those berries, the berry fruits and the sweetness.
I suppose it has, to me, maritime characteristics, although it's not a particularly maritime whiskey. Although that said, it's at Fort William, so it may not be maritime, but it is very, very close to salt water. Fort William being that very, very obvious bight that runs down the centre of Scotland, centre of the Scottish Highlands, evidence of what must have been a particularly violent tectonic event in Scotland's past there. And there's a series of so-called forts, hanging back to a very, very old and very different time between the Scottish-English relations, shall we say, when the English had sort of their fortified enclaves along this because you could run ships up and down it and you had access to the ocean. So it was a very, very important part of Scotland. Not so these days. It's sort of the fading Scottish Riviera, if you are to go there now, which is sort of fascinating to look at, but nothing like what it would have been in its past. And that is where Ben Nevis is located, you know, within not quite throwing distance, but certainly sight of that, I suppose you'd call it sort of a channel of sorts, very, very narrow one.
Well, a bit of time to breathe, though. That's got some of that fruit coming back on the nose. There are lemon drops and just a little bit of that strawberry and raspberry sweetness.
There's stone fruit on it for me. There is a little bit of apricot, even some peach there.
Ooh.
Fresh rather than dried stone fruit as well.
On the tongue, I'm getting, as say, peaches, apricots, and a little bit of pineapple. It's gone quite tropical.
It's a whiskey with a lot in there. It's very, you really do have to crack it with a bit of water, which has also shown us that this is quite resolutely unchill filtered, so that's good to see. We've got all of the goodies still in here. We've got this one particular fruit fly, which its lifespan is increasingly limited every time it flies into my field of view.
It's really going for it, though. If you see us covering the tops of our glasses, it's not because we're being paranoid, it's because there is actually a one lone bug hell-bent on diving face first.
There's one less now, but anyway. It's very different. It's quite pugnacious, I suppose you'd call it. It's really, really doing its own thing, and so I think it's probably going to be, within the wider audience, a very, very divisive whiskey. It might be a love or hate kind of a thing. I kind of love it. I think this is something I have to be in the mood for. It's not something I'd want to drink every day because it's such a particular flavour. I think it might become kind of overbearing. It's not refreshing and it's not light drinking, but it's almost the taste of curiosity. It's a very, very curious whiskey. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I'm imagining a bit of a kind of a flavour seesaw. There is the heavy sulphurous rubberiness on one end, counterbalanced with some of the peat and the mineral properties on the other. And right in the middle, in the fulcrum, is that little core of those berries and a little bit of light sweet fruit. And as it topples back and forth on its pivot, you get to taste, when it's balanced, those sweet fruits right in the middle, and it really showcases them in a way that other whiskies don't.
It's, I suppose, the most useful description I could call it is it's somewhere, and you mentioned this earlier, it's meeting somewhere in the middle between Springbank on one end and Edredure on the other. It has sort of the funky weirdness of Springbank and the quite over sherry maturation, rubbery mineral quality of Edredure, but it sits, I think, almost smack in the middle, and as such it is it's almost a style unto itself. It's not a Highland whiskey, it's not a Speyside whiskey, it is a Ben Nevis whiskey, and for better or worse, that is kind of where it maps on the flavour profile. It means that if you're a Ben Nevis fan, your favourite whiskey is always available, and if you're a Ben Nevis hater, then I guess it's really really easy to avoid, because it won't crop up anywhere else. So I guess it's very, very difficult to fault for being a very, very individual whiskey.
Distinct without being kind of extreme in any one direction over any other.
As for scores, because I think I've rambled on the esoterics of this long enough. Scores, I think this is, in a very individual way, quite excellent. It's an 88 from me. What do you think?
Very close, 87.
Yeah. If nothing else, it's its own experience. Everyone should try Ben Nevis once. It's one of those Scotch whisky milestones, not one for beginners. Certainly, it's very much quite a complicated, quite a weird thing. But particularly for people that enjoy, as we said, Edredure or Springbank, it's definitely something up that alley. It's probably the closest thing we could relate it to. But yeah, it's a Ben Nevis whiskey, and it goes for a Ben Nevis flavour in the Ben Nevis region. And that's what it tastes like. It tastes like itself. I would
more recommend you look out for an older and probably independently bottled Ben Nevis for a more unique and more compelling whiskey experience over the 10-year-old. But still, there's a lot to say for this one as well, and indeed we have said probably quite a
We
lot.
have said, I think I feel 12 minutes worth coming on, so we should probably tie it off here. At any rate, that was Ben Nevis 10-year-old. This has been the Single Malt Review. I hope you did find that particularly interesting. I certainly did. Ben Nevis is it's a surprise every time, I suppose I could call it that. At any rate, Sandra, we'll be back with another surprise imminently, even. See you then.